Thank you and good morning. First off, I'd like to thank the IATR for the opportunity to attend the conference and share learning. One thing I've certainly learned over the last couple of days is a lot of the problems that we face in London are really consistent with the States and the US, so it's no surprise there. And also I'd like to thank Matt, Karen and Tom for their hospitality during this trip. It's been really warm, so thank you very much for that. I'm going to give a relatively short presentation, the first part of which is a general overview of what we do within London, and then I'm going to come on to a bit more detail about our accessible vehicles and our accessibility specification. As Karen mentioned, that doesn't meet the US defined standards, so maybe we can come on to that a bit later and involve that as part of the debate. Okay, so within London, I work for Taxi Private Hire Directorate, which is one part of an organisation called Transport for London, which is an integrated public transport body for all transport within London. So that includes London Underground, buses, river services, and cycle hire. So it's a relatively large organisation, which is quite unique and different to the rest of the UK. Where the administration and enforcement is handled at a local council level. Within London, it's a much larger integrated transport authority, and I think employees are in the region of sort of 30 to 40,000. And the first slide just gives an overview of what we actually do within the directorate. So we appoint taxi ranks, we regulate taxi fares, undertake consultations, manage passenger complaints, provide valuable taxi and private hire information to passengers, set policy and strategy, and undertake enforcement and compliance activity. The next slide is just a bit of an overview of some of the history of London. Obviously, you'll be aware it's a pretty long history, over 300 years. I've only actually worked in taxi private hire for 2 years, so I'm probably not the best person to give you details on the history. But just a few key facts. In 1588, the first recorded use of a hackney carriage. It was interesting yesterday, the gentleman from the FTC mentioned the definition or the meaning of the word hackney came from a hackney, which is an area in London. That's actually not correct. Hackney comes from the Flemish word hackneek, which is apparently a type of horse. So just puts into context how old and potentially antiquated some of the original legislation and regulations were. And another interesting fact is that the actual first non-horse-drawn carriage was actually an electric-powered vehicle, although it did have a top speed of 9 miles an hour and an electric range of 30 miles. So maybe some of the same issues in terms of electric vehicles we have today, but probably not to that same extent. And this is just where we're based. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but yeah, we're part of Surface Transport, and we're under the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and we're tasked to deliver on his transport strategy. And the directorate has approximately 150 staff. So firstly, what's the difference between a London taxi and a private hire vehicle? I'm not sure if you've heard our definition, what is a private hire vehicle. So first off, taxis, which is commonly referred to as black cabs. So these vehicles can apply for hire on street or at ranks or pre-booked through a radio circuit or smartphone application, which we've obviously heard a lot of details about in the last couple of days. We regulate fares, which are set by the Mayor of London, and they are calculated on a meter. All vehicles are wheelchair accessible, and that's accessible to a London specification, which we set, and have a range of additional accessibility features, which I'll come on to a bit later. And another fact is actually not all taxis are black. We don't specify that taxis are black. The manufacturers produce the majority of taxis are black, but then that's purely the choice of the owner or the driver if they wish to have a black vehicle or not. So. And private hire vehicles. So private hire vehicles must be pre-booked through a licensed operator. We don't set the fares or regulate the fares in any way. and there's a wide range of vehicle types available, and so there's a lot less regulation on the actual vehicle type for a private hire vehicle. And services include a wide mix of types of services, such as what we refer to as mini cabs, chauffeur and executive car services, and limousines. And when I say limousines, I mean stretched limousines. And these vehicles cannot apply for hire or use the taxi ranks, and must not call themselves taxis or cabs. And taxis in London, sometimes referred to as hackney carriages, or personally I quite dislike that term because it's not a well-known or well-used term within the general public, so we try and avoid use of that, but in our actual legislation it is still under that definition. So we have 22 licensed taxis present within London, and currently 2 manufacturers meet our conditions of fitness. The conditions of fitness in London is basically the vehicle specification, and that covers accessibility, emissions, and a manoeuvrability requirement. And so that's a 1-year license, which is an annual licensing inspections plus 2 MOTs per year, and we have a 15-year age limit on those vehicles. Okay, so just quickly on the drivers, there's 25,000 drivers, which is a 3-year license. All drivers learn the knowledge of London. There's various criminal record and medical checks on first licensing and renewal. All drivers are self-employed, and 60% of drivers own their own taxi. And they're also required to wear a driver badge and display identifiers within their vehicles. And just a slide on the taxi fare tariff. There's 3 tariffs within London at different times, and as I mentioned previously, this is decided and determined by the mayor each year, and it's a relatively complex calculation called the cost index, which basically accounts for all the costs borne on the driver. It's quite complicated, so I won't go into too much detail on that. And licensing of private hire vehicles. So this is relatively recent, actually, in the UK. In the UK, the licensing of private hire vehicles was from 1976. I'm not actually sure why it took so long within London to license these vehicles. So previously they operated unlicensed until the introduction of the Private Hire Vehicle Act in 1998. And as I touched on earlier, there's 3 distinct licensing streams, which is operators, drivers, and vehicles, and licensing for each element of that. So just on the operators, we have just over 3,000 operators within London, and that's just a bit of the history there. So the actual licensing began following that act in 2001. The operator's license is a 5-year license, and there's 2 different sizes and costs on those sizes, standard and small, and there are regular compliance visits to operators to check a range of compliance, including booking and vehicle records. So private hire drivers, substantially more drivers for private hire vehicles than for taxis, and those numbers have increased over the last few years. Within London, we don't set caps or limits on driver or vehicle licenses for both taxi and private hire vehicles. And licensing began for the drivers in 2003, 3-year license. There's a sort of basic map reading skills test, which is sort of very different to the taxi knowledge, which is about a sort of 3 or 4 year substantial knowledge test. There's criminal record and medical checks on renewal and on first licensing, and most drivers are self-employed. So on to accessibility and accessibility within London taxis. So it was 1985 when the first wheelchair-accessible cab approved for use in London. In 1998, when the old PCO as it was known. So the licensing authority within London was actually controlled by the police, which I know is consistent in some areas within the US. And the police made a decision that all newly licensed taxis in London must be capable of carrying a passenger in a wheelchair. And then the kind of key date there is just over 10 years later, they made a decision that all taxis licensed for use in London must be capable of carrying a wheelchair. And then in 2007, we undertook a fairly substantive review of our conditions of fitness and of our specification. And as part of that review, there was a variety of accessibility enhancements, such as hearing loop, induction loop hearing system, sight patches, and colour contrasting grab handles. And this is the actual sort of quote, line for line, within our conditions of fitness on what we determine to be wheelchair accessible. So every London taxi must be equipped in order that wheelchair passengers may be carried in their chair. And nationally, there's no national or European definition of a wheelchair accessible taxi. So this is very much a specification and definition which we set within London. A couple of years ago, the DFT were interested. The Department for Transport within England, the UK, were exploring the possibility of setting a standard across the UK, but for whatever reason they didn't get around to doing that. But we were in the middle of a review by an independent government body, which is called the Law Commission. So this is something they're probably going to pick up and explore in more detail later. And I imagine they'd look in some considerable detail on our specifications and some of the specifications worldwide, such as in the States. So the DFT sets the dimensions of what is determined to be a reference wheelchair, which is basically a particularly large wheelchair, but doesn't, obviously there's such a wide variety of wheelchairs and mobility aids, mobility scooters. So we then set the specification using this reference wheelchair. And this includes the dimensions of the door entry, which is height and width, floor to height space within a taxi, and provision of a wheelchair ramp, which is a maximum weight of 300 kilograms and a length and width requirement. I did a bit of research before I came here, and from a well-known disability group, they state that 20% of Londoners have some kind of disability or mobility impairment. And it's also, this is an issue which is even more pressing given the growth in the elderly population in terms of the transformation of our population. So it's something that we continually focus on. And I must mention as well, because we set this specification, we're legally obliged to review this at regular intervals. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we reviewed that previously in 2007, but it's something that we will review again in the future. This is just a few more of those dimensions, and I can provide you the full specification for anyone who wishes to go through that in any details. So there's floor to ceiling height, flip-up seats, a designated area where wheelchair and passengers will be secured, and provision of wheelchair securing straps. So this is just a couple of pictures to show you. The second one is a passenger moving from an actual swivel seat, which is utilising the auxiliary step and grab handle to ground level. And obviously the first one is operating the ramp, entering the vehicle. That's the London taxi company. I think it's a TX1 or TX2. And this is just some of the additional accessibility features which we introduced as part of the conditions of fitness from 2007. So an induction loop system which amplifies the signal within hearing aids, grab handles on doorways which assists entry and exit, and a motion lock door. The door actually automatically locks within when the vehicle goes above 3 miles an hour, and that was introduced because a child actually opened the door of a London taxi a few years ago from a trip from Heathrow Airport and actually tragically died. So that was brought in as part of pressure we had following that in 2007. So that's taxis, and just sort of briefly on private hire vehicles. So as I mentioned previously, we don't sort of specify what vehicles must be licensed as private hire vehicles within London, as long as they're safe. But the market has supplied a range of these vehicles to meet the demand. So there's approximately 3,000 of these vehicles within London, and I imagine if you look at the pictures that these probably meet some of your US regulations in terms of accessible vehicles, in the sense of being rear loading, and you can just see the kind of size of these types of vehicles, very much specialist needs vehicles, and would carry some of the larger, heavier wheelchairs. And then there's just a slide on national position. As I mentioned, there's no consistent approach within the UK. So within London and some of the other large metropolitan areas such as Birmingham, Manchester, Coventry and Edinburgh, they have a very similar specification to what we have within London, in that they specify what is wheelchair accessible for their taxis, and they have 100% wheelchair accessible vehicles within their fleet from their specification. But there's no consistent approach. So many other authorities, particularly in rural areas, there'll be no specification to that level, so there's very limited number of accessible vehicles. So it's a very sort of case-by-case approach. As I mentioned, there's a national review undertaken by the Law Commission. I think Jessica actually came from the Law Commission last year, so I suppose you've got some basic understanding of that. It's probably worth saying that that's quite a challenging task when you've got something in the region of 400 licensing authorities which set their own policies and conditions on vehicles, that the Law Commission are trying to look at developing a national standard, a national framework to accommodate the needs of all these different users and different types of vehicles. So we're really interested to see what the outcome of that is by December this year. So there's mixed fleets within the UK. However, there's a growing pressure for all fleets to be wheelchair accessible in taxis within the next 10 years, and also pressure to develop and implement a nationwide program of disability awareness training, excuse me, for drivers. And this is probably something that we'll explore in more detail moving forward, because it's only part of the story having an accessible vehicle. The other 50% is making sure that that driver understands how to operate that equipment effectively. And this is just a slide on some of the new taxis, London taxis in development. So there's a number of vehicle manufacturers. Actually, there's three. So I'll go through the three pictures. The first one is the Crusan, which I'm sure you've seen, and we've been working very closely with Crusan and to understand their vehicle and for them to sort of get a greater understanding of what the requirements are within London. And they obviously we don't set, or we don't sign a contract for one vehicle. We have a specification which any vehicle manufacturer can meet, and we encourage that competition. At present, we have two vehicles: the London Taxi Company TX range and the Mercedes Vito taxi, which is a converted second-stage manufactured vehicle. But we'd be more than happy to have a range of different vehicles which meet our specification to give drivers choice and competition. And as part of that criteria, obviously I've mentioned accessibility, but what is a strong drive from the Mayor of London is emissions and air quality within London. And so that's something that we're in discussion with the manufacturers at present, and in future we're likely to set a date of where all new licensed taxis must be zero emission capable. And the third point, in terms of, actually we don't set this, but we do mention it, and it's kind of part of the story, you can't really ignore it, is the iconic look of the London taxi, which is obviously something which It's good for tourism, and you know, people like to see these iconic vehicles. But we don't actually set or mandate anything which, you know, which determines that nature, other than the specification. So there's the size and dimension, but the kind of shape or aesthetic quality of that vehicle we don't set. But we absolutely encourage manufacturers to do that, because there's a demand by the drivers and by the public at large to travel in these vehicles, which, you know, have an aesthetic view of London and the landscape and DNA of London. So the first is Crusan. The second is a company called Fraser Nash, who are developing a vehicle based on the old Metro cab brand. And the third vehicle, which I'm sure you know, is the Nissan London taxi, which that we're in close contact with Nissan and working together to develop this new vehicle. And the third vehicle, which unfortunately I couldn't put a picture on there because they haven't made a prototype yet, but the London Taxi Company are developing their new taxi of tomorrow as well, which also looks really exciting. Unfortunately, I couldn't put a photo on there, but I'm sure you'll see further details of that in the near future. And they look to have a vehicle ready for market by 2018. Just before I go, Karen mentioned maybe it's worth going over something about the airports we have within London. So we have two airports based in London, one which is a city airport, and the second being Heathrow, obviously the largest airport. We don't have any sort of huge issues in terms of accessibility within those airports, given that we mandate that all taxis must be wheelchair accessible. The airport's obviously on private land, and they have responsibility for the running of the taxi operation within the airport. But as these taxis are owner operated, it's kind of free for all London drivers to enter the airport to operate on that rank system there. So at all times there will be an accessible taxi available for travel. I mentioned this to Karen in terms of maybe if someone has a wheelchair which can't be used by our London taxis. There are also private hire operators within the airport. So the other choice is to pre-book a larger specialist needs vehicle, as I indicated earlier on the slide. But happy to answer any additional questions on airports later on. Okay, thank you very much.
Tom, before we lose you there, I did want to ask, you just alluded to the fact that if there are individuals arriving at the airport and have mobility devices that can't be accommodated in the London taxi, can you, I want to get into that aspect of the percentage of mobility devices that can and can't be accommodated in the London taxi, and what the actual experience is like for transport. And by that I mean, are wheelchairs traveling sideways as opposed to forward-facing or rear-facing? There's a lot of rules around that in North America with the ADA and other pieces of legislation. Can you talk about where those lines are?
As I mentioned before, we set that specification, and we're not sort of regularly challenged on that. We have a legal obligation to review that specification, so it's something I'd be quite keen to do in my position, sort of being here for a couple of years, to have to undertake a review in the near future and look at some of those additional accessibility requirements. And we work very closely with disability user groups and to understand their needs. And I think I mentioned this before. I think it's impossible to have a vehicle which is 100%, fully 100% wheelchair accessible for 100% of wheelchairs. This is a developing area, and it's going to be developing in the years to come. So, personally, I think by having a specification which meets the needs of the majority of these wheelchairs, and then to review that in future to build on their specifications. And we work very closely with the manufacturers. As I mentioned, we work closely with London Taxi Company, Crusan, Nissan and Mercedes in the development of these vehicles to understand the needs of disabled users in the future. So it's an ongoing process. I'm not saying that we've got a perfect solution, which is it will meet the needs of your states and your citizens. Obviously, this is local licensing, and it's really up to the politicians and the officials within those areas to understand what the needs may be within their local areas. In London, we've made a decision to say that all our taxis are accessible to this certain point, which we think works successfully for us. But as I said, outside in the UK, there's other areas where they don't see that as a need. So that's the position we're in. And as I say, we have the specification, and it's continuously under review, and we'd look to review that in the future.
The one last question I have then is, if these vehicles have been on the road since 1985, which is dangerously close to 30 years, and that's dangerous because I was in university in 85, has there ever been a situation where a passenger traveling in a wheelchair has been injured in an accident in those vehicles?
There won't be any vehicles that are on the road which were licensed in 1985. We've got a 15-year age limit, so the oldest vehicles is going to be sort of 15 to 16 years old following the introduction of that age limit. I'm not aware of an accident or a serious accident, as you mentioned, with a wheelchair user.
And it's obviously a loaded question. I mean, the reason that I ask is because the fear of the liability of not having a perfect solution keeps a lot of options out of the market. Right. And so I was kind of prompting your thoughts. Yeah,
I don't know. We mentioned this earlier. I'm not sure if there's a difference in terms of the litigation culture within the US, which we don't have to the same extent. In the 2 years I've been at TfL, it's not something that we've been pressured by the disability user groups. Obviously we want to have a vehicle which meets that, as close to that 100% accessible as possible. We can't keep changing that on a yearly basis, because obviously that's going to have a detrimental impact on the manufacturers that produce these vehicles. So we work very closely with the manufacturers and look to build on that specification and build on those requirements as much as we're able to do so.
Thank you. Are there any questions? We can take that now.
Just a quick question. Do drivers have to demonstrate the capability to secure the wheelchair accessible passengers in their vehicles? Yeah,
there's a requirement within the Knowledge for London to undertake that. Yeah,
that's a very good idea, because what we see, at least in Los Angeles, sometimes drivers change out these wheelchair vehicles and they don't know how to properly secure wheelchair passengers.
If I'm honest, we still have that same issue. As I said, it's part of the solution to the problem is to make sure that your drivers can correctly utilize the equipment on these vehicles. So I think driver training is essential as part of that. And we also undertake enforcement activity, which we've done in the build-up to the Olympic Games, actually, given the Olympic and Paralympic Games and the scrutiny that we were going to be under. So we undertook quite an extensive range of enforcement activity to first advise drivers, and then we kind of scaled it up and actually took enforcement action against their licenses if they didn't operate those ramps and those different features within those vehicles effectively.
Tom, thank you. I'm sure we're going to be calling on you. Jeffrey, if I could ask you to come up and tag team with me a bit, if you wouldn't mind giving us your introduction. I'm going to rely on you as I call up your presentation.
Thank you. That was a very polite way of saying I never submitted a bio, so I appreciate that. My name is Jeffrey Llewellyn. I'm the First Deputy Commissioner of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection in Chicago. I'm here representing Commissioner Krimbel, who is a huge fan of IATR and of Karen and Matt. And I have to say, in my experience here, I rarely have seen two more dynamic people, and what a great conference it is. So I thank you very much for having us. My background coming to a department that regulates taxis actually started with city government in Chicago in 1998 when I left a organization where I was researching the conditions of the homeless and became an administrator of welfare to work programs that were being launched at the time of welfare reform at that time. And one of the interesting things about a lot of those programs, for those of you who may have been familiar with them, was that there was a lot of emphasis on outcomes. And so what we did for the several years that I was there at the Office of Workforce Development was devise performance-based contracting for the many vendors that we used. It was from there that I went to the budget office at the City of Chicago and was named the Director of Performance Management for the City of Chicago. We had a performance management program that was recently implemented that had performance benchmarks and metrics for all 45 city departments, as well as an executive review system for all of those departments that ran continually throughout the year. It was from that experience I really got to know a lot about many different departments, and especially Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, because their performance management director and the counsel for that department was an incredibly professional lawyer named Rosemary Krimbel. When Mayor Rahm Emanuel was elected, he appointed Rosemary Krimbel as Commissioner of the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, and she asked me to be her first deputy, which is more or less the equivalent of a chief of staff. So I went to Business Affairs and Consumer Protection having an idea of what their performance metrics were, and so I thought it was perfectly suited for the job. It took me probably about a week or 2 weeks working with the Public Vehicle Division to realize that I knew absolutely nothing about taxi regulation, and what an incredibly unique and interesting field of operation that it was. Fortunately for myself, we just have an incredible team of professionals at that department, one of whom is Rupal Bapat, who's sitting here to my left, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Public Vehicles Operations, and she is one of the co-authors of the ordinance that was rewritten in the first year of Rosemary Krimbel's tenure as Commissioner that reorganized and reformed a lot of the way that we do regulation of public vehicles. So fortunately for me, I have an expert in the field that I've been able to work with and hopefully support in her efforts to make public vehicles regulation as safe and effective in Chicago as possible. So that's my background, and that's why I'm here today representing Commissioner Krimbel. Will this advance the slides? Okay, let's see, perfect. Okay, so the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, amongst other things, ensures Chicago public vehicles are safe, reliable, and are the real point of entry, one of the first impressions that we make upon any visitors that come to the city of Chicago. In addition to that, we also license all businesses in Chicago, and we also regulate cable companies in Chicago. So the department does a variety of things, and one of those is the licensing and enforcement of our taxi regulations. So to give you an idea of the sort of level of service that we provide, there are about 10,000 public vehicles that we license. We monitor the activity of 6,800 licensed taxi cabs. We have a set of investigators ourselves. We also work closely with the Chicago Police Department. And we also have a team of team of lawyers that will prosecute the citations that we write. We oversee the issuance and transfer of about 6,800 taxi medallions. It's capped at 6,999. There are about 6,800 that are in the hands of private individuals. We conduct about, the last couple of years, it's been 19,500 public vehicle inspections annually. Every taxi is required to be inspected twice a year. We track roughly 12,000 public vehicle consumer complaints yearly. We have a 311 system where we get those complaints. We also get communications directly from people in the field of illegal activity amongst taxi cabs and Lyft and other things that are going out there. And we have an enforcement arm, like I said, that follows up on that and enforces. So what I was asked to talk about today was specifically the wheelchair accessible vehicles in Chicago's taxi fleet, the new centralized dispatch service that we just contracted with, that we implemented on August 1st for wheelchair accessible vehicles. And then another one of our strategies to increase the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles in the fleet, the WAVE, which is wheelchair accessible vehicle. So if you don't mind, I'll be using the term WAVE going forward. The WAVE cost reimbursement program, as well as the federal New Freedom Grant. So right now we have a mix of different incentives and different strategies to try to get as many wheelchair accessible vehicles in the fleet. And let me tell you, for the most part, we focus on everything that we can do as a regulator to make it profitable, to make it a good business decision for people to pick up people in wheelchairs. We're definitely more on the carrot as opposed to the stick. We want a successful, thriving taxi industry, and we think the best way for people in wheelchairs to get serviced is if we can do everything in our power to make it an economically viable trip for our drivers. So one of our mandates, however, is that if a licensee owns 20 or more taxi cab medallions, 5% of those 5% of those vehicles must be WAVEs. As I mentioned, the Chicago market for taxi medallion owners is incredibly diverse. Over 1/2 of medallion owners, more than 3,000, only own 1 or 2 medallions. That may be more similar to the situation you have in London. It's not dominated by fleets. There's also a requirement that all waves, all medallion owners who have waves must register with centralized dispatch service, which is a financial commitment on an annual basis and funds that service. Another element of our incentives for people to become wheelchair accessible, to get wheelchair accessible vehicles is we will award 1 medallion every year to a driver, a chauffeur, a non-medallion owner who has done excellent service in wheelchair accessible vehicles. So when we were here last year, we had about 174 vehicles. In the time that has passed, we've added 3 more to the fleet. You'll notice we had a big spike between 2011 and 2012. It's leveled off some since then, and we think the main factor in that was the ceasing of production of the MV1. The MV1 is a purpose-built wheelchair vehicle that has side entry, which is a requirement in Chicago. It's very popular. Anecdotally, we hear that it does not have many of the mechanical issues and repair issues that converted vehicles have. And I should mention that amongst the other incentives in our new taxi ordinance for people to use wheelchair accessible vehicles is that, now you heard the gentleman from London say that they had a 15-year lifespan for their vehicles. In Chicago, it's only 4. If it's a wheelchair accessible vehicle, you get an extra year, and if it passes inspection, it can actually stay on the road indefinitely. So MV1s were perceived as being a vehicle that could stay on the road for a long time without a lot of repair costs. So when that went out of production, we've stalled a little bit. It's going back into production, and we've got some high hopes that we're going to be able to drive that figure up in the near future. So we have a total active fleet of 6,513 as of today. 177 of those are waves. And to give you an idea of how our incentives have made an impact, 127 are there under the mandate of the 5% for those who have more than 20 cabs. We've got an additional 50 for people who are choosing to enter the market. So now if I'd like to move on to our centralized dispatch service. Historically, centralized dispatch in Chicago was performed by one of our taxi associations. It wasn't a contract. The city had no regulatory power over it. And when Rupel and our commissioner rewrote the new ordinance, they made sure to enable the commissioner to enter into a contractual arrangement with a centralized dispatch service. That allows us to be able to hold that service accountable and make a lot of improvements to the actual service. So we put an RFP out, and the winning bidder offers something that I think is just a quantum leap from what we were getting before. And that's not to disparage what we were getting before, but as you'll see, they have a lot of unique characteristics here that lend themselves to really delivering effective service. One thing their proposal did was, in general, they took the approach, again, that they want taxi cab drivers to want to do these pickups. They want to make it economically viable for them. So the very first thing they did was they charged a much smaller fee than what we were originally charging for someone to be part of the centralized dispatch service. Then they also put in their proposal that as we got more vehicles in, that fee would go down. The gentleman from Los Angeles mentioned that they have a not-for-profit that does their dispatch service over at the airport. We find the not-for-profit as a dispatcher carries some significant advantages. One thing is that they've got a steady revenue stream, but they have no incentive to lop off anything above expenses and take it as profit. It's continually reinvested into the program, which I'll be talking about a little bit more. Of the incentives that they're providing, you see a detailed revamped airport voucher award program. That's essentially something where if someone does some wheelchair accessible rides, they'll get a voucher that allow them to go to the front of the line at our 2 airports, Midway and O'Hare. Gas and food gift cards, where gas costs more than the fare, so to incentivize people to make some of those short trips with a person in a wheelchair. But you know what? That's turned into where they basically use the food and gift cards, the food and gas gift cards, anytime there's a surge in demand. So they basically make it more affordable. They give financial incentives to the taxi cab drivers, the wave vehicles, to get on the road, get more of them on the road, and pick up people so that they can, so that it makes it worth their while to deliver the service. And I'm going to show you what our outcome in our first month is here. We went from what was generally a 6.5 to 7.5% no-show rate under the old system to, in the first month, a 0.2%, only 3 no-shows for over 1,800 pickups. And before we left to come to St. Louis, there have been no no-shows so far for this month. And the thing is, I mean, if you look at the dispatch, if you go to the dispatch site where the service is being done, you'll see that more than half the dispatchers are in wheelchairs themselves. When they get calls that they need for someone that needs a wheelchair pickup, they do everything in their power to make sure that person gets picked up. You know, it's a mission-driven, disability organization that is very motivated to make sure that no one gets left on the side of the road, and it makes a huge difference. As you can see, they gave away $2,500 in gift cards and incentives to drivers in the first month. Now, there's a longer-term strategy to make it more economical, make it a more efficient pickup in the use of tablets and using the technology to do that driver-to-passenger direct communication, so that, if you're going to go pick someone up, they're going to be on the curb at a certain time, you're going to be able to get them into the cab and move on. I mean, that's key to making these sorts of pickups economically viable, because if you talk to drivers, that's one of their main concerns, is that the person may take a long time to get down to the cab, it may take a long time to load them into the cab, and it just becomes a very expensive trip for them. So the plan going forward is to use that technology to make those trips more economically efficient and worthwhile for the drivers. But in the meantime, if they have a hard time getting someone, they use their revenue stream to boost the number of drivers that are willing to make those pickups. And it's been very successful so far. Another part of their strategy is, again, and to make it as efficient and as strong a service as possible, is they're using some of the revenue that they get in from this program to install their tablets and the person-to-person software and the dispatching system at their targets, the 100 major city healthcare centers and destinations for people in wheelchairs in the city of Chicago. So let me go on to the third part of what I was asked to talk about today, which is the WAVE cost reimbursement program. This program is something that was part of the new ordinance as well, that Rupel and the commissioner wrote up. But the general idea is we're diverting part of the license revenue into a separate fund that'll be used to reimburse anyone who will either get a vehicle modified to become a wheelchair accessible vehicle or to purchase a purpose-built wheelchair accessible vehicle. Right now we have $1 million in the fund. I'm going to talk about the enhancement to the fund that we're getting from the federal government in a bit. But that program was launched this year. We have not dispersed any money yet. Again, the MV1 going offline has had a hit on that. But we're hoping to rev that up again in the years to come, especially when the MV1 comes back in production. And I'm going to talk briefly about the New Freedom Grant. That's part of the Safety Lieu FTA surface transportation legislation. If anyone, maybe the airports are more familiar with this legislation, it was originally ICE-T back in the day, became NEXT-T. It's a huge omnibus funding mechanism for building roads and all sorts of things. Actually, back when welfare reform was launched in the mid-90s, President Clinton went to all of his cabinet heads and said, listen, I want every one of you to find something you can do to help out with welfare reform. And this is how it was relayed to me anyhow. And my understanding is that's when the Job Access Reverse Commute Program, JARC, was created as part of this legislation. And New Wave, New Freedom, is in the same spirit, where they use some of their transportation dollars to facilitate reverse commutes for people in low job neighborhoods to high job neighborhoods. And then the New Freedom Grant is specifically for people with disabilities to facilitate their ability to get to work and to commute. So it's a very difficult program to apply. It's always difficult to get money from the federal government, especially if it's for a somewhat new idea. There's a number of regulations in this that are very complex. And to give you an idea, we had to apply to, through the RTA, our Regional Transit Authority, to get a project approved. They had to get it approved by the FTA. Then we had to, once it was approved, we had to move it to our Department of Transportation, which accepts the money from the FTA directly. And so now we're dealing directly with the FTA, and the RTA is not in the middle anymore. But that was a lot of gymnastics just to get to the point where we could get the funds deposited in our accounts. The biggest challenge to that fund was the procurement regulations. Typically, the fund gives you money to buy things. And so they had a very complex, well, not complex, but they had a competitive bidding requirement anytime you use those funds to purchase something. But we wanted to reimburse. We didn't want to purchase. So it took a lot of communication back and forth and lobbying to get the FTA to agree that our reimbursement program was essentially competitive, wasn't being a bad use of federal dollars, and they ultimately approved our proposal. So we were awarded $1.8 million approximately. Oh, the other big problem, the big obstacle for many areas in using this money is it requires a cash match. It can't be an in-kind match. It has to be a literal cash match. Luckily, since we created the waive reimbursement fund, we are one of the few jurisdictions that had a completely clean cash match. It wasn't another federal fund that we were using for the match. It wasn't, it wasn't something like that. It was corporate dollars. It was, city dollars that we used for our match. So we just recently got the money put into the Department of Transportation, and then from there it will go to a fund. It will go to our waive reimbursement fund, and we're in the process of implementing this. We got the award last year. I would imagine it'll probably be a year and a half before we're actually able to spend any money. And it's a tricky process. We've been working with Patrick Joyce from New York. They're also got some waive funds. We gave them our application to show them how we got it, and they're, as I understand, using some creative ways to get around some of the requirements. So it's really a learning experience. Oops, sorry. So in this presentation, which you can get at IATR's website, there are links to our website where you can get a lot of information about what's going on in our public vehicle area. And then I would definitely encourage you, if anyone would like a copy of our application for New Freedom, if anyone would like to see what the RFP we use for the dispatch service, feel free to email me, or anyone would like to see this presentation, please feel free to send me an email. Those are all public documents. We're happy to share them. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if you have.
Any questions?
Yes.
Just one question, and I must admit, at airports, we typically have concession agreements, and the cost of the vehicle and other things are built into that concession agreement, which the private operator pays for. This is a public operation here, and it can be very laudatory in terms of the aims and objectives. But when I divided 1,800 trips by 147 vehicles, that's about 0.4 trips per day per vehicle. So we would say you've got room for growth. You're using about 5% of that capacity. But have you attempted to look at the cost per trip? It would come out to a very large number. Have you attempted to go to the public transit system and say, look, you have a great commitment there with respect to your required services. Can we move some of that work which is being done by the public transit system at a very expensive cost over to the private sector to use some of these wave vehicles? You've got great capacity there, but you're going to have to figure out a way to pay for it at some time in the future.
If I understand your question correctly, and I'm going to shoot this over to Rupal because I think she wants to respond too. This, Rupal, I'm interpreting what he's to say to be related to our work with PACE. That's exactly right. PACE is our suburban transit agency that has programs that people with disabilities can enroll in, and that's exactly what they did. We created a voucher program so that our wheelchair accessible vehicles supplement their van service. Rupal, do you want to add to that?
Yes, the program that we're talking about already exists. It's actually funded by the state of Illinois, and it's through the Regional Transportation Authority. They have two programs where public transportation funds people that have to use special vehicles or can't use a bus or train to get to work or to the doctor's appointment. So they actually have two programs, the two reimbursement systems already in place. This has been in place for years. Mm-hmm. This is, so there's the two programs. One is you actually get a debit card. It's called Taxi Access Program. So if you're a qualified participant and you have to, as a customer, you have to go to PACE and submit why you're qualified for the reimbursement program, you get a debit card and then you download how many cab fares you want to use. You pay a percentage of the cab fare. You pay, it's like $3.50 you pay, or actually I think it's $5 now, and the rest is reimbursed by PACE. So PACE works with all the cab companies, and all the cab companies and all the taxi cabs and cab drivers are trained on how to use the TAP program and the debit card, and they have to participate in the program. Not everybody that's in the TAP program, not all customers or passengers necessarily need a wheelchair accessible vehicle. They just need other types of taxi cabs, so we have that in place for years. And then there's another system called Mobility Direct, which is for, it's basically scheduled regular cab trips, like to a regular doctor's appointment or dialysis on a regular basis. And that is, for that customer, the passenger, it's exactly the cost of a bus fare. So it's like $350, and everything else is supplemented by the PACE program.
That's a great question, though, if I may add, though, because that is a challenge. When we went to the centralized dispatch service to incorporate all these things into the new centralized dispatch service, one, it broke a monopoly because that PACE program was serviced by one particular fleet, and now it can be spread out amongst all the taxis in the city.
Question over here.
As Jeff had alluded, we have a wheelchair dispatch program in New York City, and Conan is going to elaborate on that. And I have to preface this by saying Bill Scalzi's here from Metro Taxi. Metro Taxi does a magnificent job of handling the dispatch services for our wheelchair accessible dispatch program, and we're thrilled to death with the way it's working, and it's going to get even better with the addition of 2,000 new wheelchair accessible medallions. That said, I'm just curious at how you arrived at the superiority of the not-for-profit model for your dispatch program.
I'd say that it was the usual virtue of doing competitive bidding. We put out an RFP and we got proposals, and there are a couple of them were very creative. But this one by Open Doors organization, which is an international organization, I don't know if you've dealt with them in London, but they work on, their specialty really is airports, and airports being easily used by persons with disabilities. They chose to respond, and they came up with a great program. A really interesting part of it that we really liked was that they partnered with a startup in Humboldt Park, which is a neighborhood in Chicago, a tech startup that had a really interesting app. They weren't able to sustain that app, and so they're kind of back out in the market now looking for a different new technology partner. But it was a homegrown solution, and they were just, we didn't suggest that anyone have a declining, a sliding scale as more taxis came on. We didn't suggest. We asked for incentive ideas, but we didn't give them any, any guidance there. It was their imaginative, it was their creative processes that came up with just a great proposal. So, an interesting aspect of this is, as you were saying, sir, from this is a concession. We didn't have to do it, but through competitive bidding. We had no legal requirement, actually, in this particular procurement process to do it through competitive bidding, but we did, for the very purpose you mentioned, to try to get as many creative proposals as possible.
Thanks, Jeff.
Can I ask a question, Jeff, and Tom as well? Jeff, you mentioned vehicle life for the MV1, and Tom, if you tell an American a vehicle would last for 15 years, they'll think you've got two heats. But it changes the economics of the industry, and it makes accessibility affordable, potentially. How long is the MV1 going to last in service?
I'm not equipped to tell you. Common sense will tell you that if you're going to purpose build something, you should be able to build something that's going to be more reliable than if you're taking a car that was designed for something else and then modifying it. So there's that. The other thing about Chicago is that we require, the disability community is very, very firm about this, that we require side entrance, which is handicapped us a little bit, pardon the expression, because there's some great vehicles out there that are rear entry, but they just can't work in our market.
Jeff, I'm Taylor Clark with MobilityWorks. We actually service and sell the MV1 in Chicago, or did prior, and we're the servicing centers throughout Chicago with 4 locations through the Chicagoland supporting the MV1. I don't think anyone can answer your question. Yeah, well, can't speak to London. I can speak to Chicago and the United States, and I just don't think anyone can answer your questions. I think the life expectancy of a commercial vehicle in the United States, if you went to the National Association of Fleet Administrators, for example, they would have to break that down analytically, but I don't think it's, they could take it out any more than 4 to 5 years unless you're talking about a UPS kind of scenario.
The issue here is if you are throwing a vehicle away after 4 years, it is not going to give you an affordable, accessible wave program. If your vehicle lasts for 15 years, the economics are so significantly different, and in Liverpool and Belfast, it's 20 years. Why does a London vehicle last so long, and perhaps why do American vehicles last so short a period of time?
I think that's a huge question. I don't think I'd want to embrace that question, but
Yeah, I mean, there's climate is different. I don't know
but speaking for Ford Motor Company, that's the objective. I mean, we all saw the new Transit Connect last night, and there is some real innovative technology coming out in these world platforms that are going to change everyone in this room's lives. And the new Transit Connect is a start. I believe MV1 is going to start up. We've got, Crusan is a very interesting model right now, but as an OEM upfitter and understanding the intricacies, I think we are going to get more life out of our vehicles. But no one can answer, and certainly if MV1 was here, they'd tell you they have no, they could not say 10-year vehicle. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, so to answer your question, so we have a 4-year age requirement for non-wave, non-fuel efficient. So it's 4 years max if it's not a wave or fuel efficient. It's 5 years if it's either or. And then if it's both, so if you have a wave that's CNG or hybrid, that's 6 years. But on top of that, if the wave vehicle passes inspection twice a year, keeps passing inspection, it can remain longer. So we don't know. This is, the ordinance reform just went into effect last year. So we don't have 10-year vehicles because it's just a new program. So we'll see what happens in the future. But even a converted vehicle. It doesn't have to be an MV1. A converted vehicle, if it keeps passing inspection twice a year, it can stay on the road beyond 6 years.
As the moderator here, I'm going to ask for your assistance. I want to do justice to our panelists, and as it was pointed out, Bill Scalzi is in the room. We have Braun Ability has been here at the conference. A number of people with a lot of expertise I want to make sure we get to in the next half hour. So Jeffrey, thank you for that. The room got animated when we started talking about vehicles and payback and all that. So I want to read into that is where we want to make sure we focus for the part of the remainder. This nice segue comes from Tom, as he mentioned that the UK has a different litigation approach as opposed to North America, which brings us to New York City. And so I assume that by inviting Conan Freud to come up to the podium now and join us, I know everyone is interested to know what's going on with the Nissan vehicle there. And Conan did provide his bio for me. Conan, I have no idea where I've set that right now. If you could please introduce yourself as I call up your presentation.
Okay. Good morning, folks. Just wanted to welcome everybody. Here we go. Okay, my name is Conan Freud. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. I'm sorry I'm a little nasal today, a little cold, but we're going to try to struggle through this. I have been with the Taxi and Limousine Commission for the last 3.5 years. Before that, I worked at the city's office, New York City's Office of Management Budget for 16 years. I worked at the New York City Department of Transportation for 7 years, and I worked at Hunter College for 3 years. Don't ask, took a little academic sojourn, and then now I'm back in the world of transportation. So I wanted to talk to you today about kind of our multi-variety approach of how we're dealing with accessible issues in New York. What you see on the first page is Can you hear me now? Okay. So what you're seeing here, and I'll try to make this real quick, is a map that we did of our accessible dispatch program from September 12th to March 14th. These are all the pickups. Little dots are all the pickups. So you can see that. No? Oh, okay. Just a little history. In 2004, the city offered for sale our first restricted accessible medallions. So I think I can't remember. Right now we have 231. I don't remember the first sale, how large that was, but after the new millennium, we started trying to deal with accessibility on the yellow fleet side. In July of 2008 through June of 2010, we got about $1 million from our city council to run a accessible dispatch demonstration program. The program was not a success. We learned a lot, but we were not getting many trips per day. I think we had 8, 10.
We were set up for 250. We got an average of 8.
Yeah, so that was not a success, but sometimes the Mayor Bloomberg is one who always wants us to experiment, so I think it was kind of, that's what we needed to do. This is a little busy, but we'll try to work through that. So based on sort of what we learned from that experiment, we put out a new RFP, a competitive process, and selected a vendor called Metro Taxi. They're in the back of the room, say hello later. We also went through a process of approving rules regarding the program, and then we had to register the contract with our city controller. And then the program starts in September of 2012. We had our 10,000th accessible taxi dispatch trip, and then it's in June, and then in August we actually started our street hail delivery program, which we'll talk about in a second. How our program works: if you need a wheelchair accessible cab only in Manhattan, that's not in all the boroughs, only in Manhattan, you can call us, you can text message us. We have a website, we have an app. The dispatcher will get the call. Our 231 accessible cabs are sort of signed up for the program. They have to respond in 120 seconds. If they don't respond, we have ways of dealing with that called the Fine Book, and it's a very successful tool. What we learned from our first program was that the deadhead cost to the driver is something that we needed to address, and the driver is compensated for the deadhead. I always forget how much they get, but Bill will remind me, I just can't remember off the top of my head today. If the passenger doesn't show, we also compensate the driver for that. The way the program is paid for by the medallion owners. There are 13,237 medallion owners. First year fee was $98 per medallion. The second year was $54. There were some initial upfront costs that we had to pay for in terms of equipping the cabs with the dispatch system, and that's why the fee drops. And we have not negotiated the third-year fee, so Bill, don't get any hopes up. Here we are in terms of what we did. Demonstration project, you can see we did about 112 trips in a week. We're now up to 535, and average 76 a day. Average waiting time has obviously dramatically declined. That's the whole program. We completed 5,800 trips. We completed half that in 1 month, and we have 800, and that's the number of users. This chart just kind of shows you as the number of trips has gone up, and that's the blue line, the dispatch time has gone down, so more trips have not had a diminishment of service. If I can get this little bugger to work. Okay. What are we doing going forward? First thing, obviously we continue to keep the 231 on the street. We are going to be selling 2,000 new yellow taxi accessible medallions. We're going to start that, hopefully, if everything works right, in November with the sale of first 200. All of those medallions will have to participate in the accessible dispatch program, and we hope to drive that waiting time down from 15 minutes to significantly less. We are working with our transit authority to partner with them to have their clients use prepaid debit cards to use the taxi service. Currently, our transit authority, they have we call Access-a-Ride program, costs about $60 a trip. The average taxi fare is about $15 a trip. A significant cost savings to the city and the state who support the program, and obviously a significant improvement, I think, in quality of service if we can get that going. Also, our other approach is outside of Manhattan. We are selling 18,000 street hail livery permits. They are not medallions; they are permits. 20% of those must be wheelchair accessible. We have sold out the first 1,200 wheelchair accessible permits that we had to sell. How did we do that? Very simple, economics. We offered them for free. People took them. Free is a good thing. We need to sell 6,000. We are authorized up to sell 6,000 for the first year, then 6,000 the next, 6,000 in the third year. We can only sell accessible. To sell the regular permit, we also have to sell accessible permits. Yeah, we reached the goal on Monday. Also, to incentivize the street hail program to adopt wheelchair accessible vehicles, we allowed people to buy 5 permits at a time. The unrestricted permits were only allowed to be bought 1 at a time. We are also giving people up to $15,000 grants to cover the conversion of a vehicle or new purchase of a vehicle for wheelchair accessibility. We also have a New York State tax credit for the purchase of accessible permits. This is just kind of a schematic of where green cabs will work. Yellows can work anywhere. Greens can work in the 4 boroughs in northern Manhattan. And then there's black car services also. Just want to talk about a second about the NV200. That is, there it is. It has been driving around New York for past month or so, testing. 3 months? Yeah, I guess 3 months, off and on. We expect to launch the vehicle in the end of October. We've spent about 5-6 years on the project. Along with accessibility, it is also dealing with a lot of other issues that, as we age in population, hearing loops, high contrast markings, a flat floor, grips, step to get into the vehicle. The NV200 is an accessible vehicle. I keep on hearing that it's not. It is an accessible vehicle. It will be converted by Braun, who's been partnering with Nissan. The partnership will allow that the vehicle will have an OEM manufacturer warranty for 150,000 miles, powertrain warranty. I think it's bumper to bumper to 36. I'm not 100% sure about that. It will be cost around $14,000 above the MSRP for a regular non-accessible NV200. Just kind of a chart here on kind of where we're going. We've sort of started the program, I guess you could say, prior to the SHLs. Of 231, we expect to have hopefully 200 more yellow on the street in 2013. Then, as it keeps on growing, we expect to have by 2017 5,800 accessible vehicles on the street. So that's pretty impressive. And that's it. That's the nickel tour. Apologize for my...
Any questions? Thank you, Conan. With that, I do want to make sure we give ample time for Francine's presentation. Would you rather speak from there? Or?
Just speak from here.
Wonderful. Francine has a BA in Organization Development from Regis University. Previous professional experience is 20 years with the Hertz Corporation and 10 years with the airlines. She's retired from Frontier Airlines and 8 years with the City and County of Denver. She has a background in management and human resources, our primary professional background, 5 children and 4 grandchildren. I couldn't believe that part of it. And so, Francine, we're excited to turn this over to you for the airport perspective.
Sure, not a problem. Thanks for having me. I will keep this brief. I just want to talk about the challenges that we have as an airport operator. We work very closely with our service providers, which at DIA consists of shared van services, the taxis, the limousines, public transportation, and as you know, Denver's not close to anything. DIA is not close to anything. The challenges that we run into in assisting those that have the accessibility needs is the short, the ones that come in that haven't made pre-arrangements. All the information we need to assist the customer to get their accessibilities taken care of is posted on our website, but a lot of those folks that come into Denver, sometimes they have to stop there out of their control because we do have weather-related issues. With our service providers, with the 4 taxi companies that currently have permits to operate at DIA, they do require an advance notice if wheelchair accessibility is needed. And that can be anywhere from 24 hours to 48 hours. So the challenge that we have as customer service representatives of DIA is to try to find those people who are here without notice, how to get them from point A to point B. We work very closely with the taxi companies that are available, but again, if they're downtown, it's going to take them at least 45 minutes to get to the customer at the airport. We do what we can to call these companies to try to get them to get out there as soon as possible. The other issues that we run into as an airport entity are service animals. We do have some providers that, for lots of different reasons, don't like to transport the service animals with those that need them. So it is our rule as a city and also as a representative of Denver is to try to accommodate them as best we can. We have our public transportation, which all of our big buses do have the wheelchair accessibility. But as you know, public transportation isn't always the most convenient. It doesn't get you as close to where you need to go. So those are the types of challenges that we run into. Previously, before I was with the city, again, I was with the airlines, and part of my responsibility with the airlines was to transport the customers that needed assistance, whether it be a meet and assist because of a language barrier or being visually impaired, transporting them from the aircraft to that transportation provider. So once you get someone on an aircraft who needs your assistance, you got to get them from point A to point B. It's more than just one person. There's 4 different entities at DIA that handle those passengers that need assistance. You have 2 of the airlines that take care of it themselves, and then we have 2 contractors that take care of it for the rest of the airlines. So it's definitely a lot of communication that has to be done to make sure that customer is assisted. As you know, we're going through a huge construction project at DIA, our South Terminal Redevelopment Project, which has changed our traffic pattern where for almost a year we didn't have curbside drop-off. So that kind of posed to us another challenge on how to get those customers who did need that wheelchair assistance from Island 5, if you've been to the airport, all the way into the airline. So we had built the relationships with those providers to where we gave the operators contact information to utilize to call those providers ahead of time when a customer needed to be assisted. So again, it's a partnership. We're not perfect. We are still kind of going through some growing pains along with the construction pains. But we do what we can as representatives of the city and the Department of Aviation to make sure those customers that need a little bit extra assistance, whether it's complete mobility, just a hand to get where they need to go, we make sure that we're there working in conjunction with our operators to make sure that they get assisted. So those are just kind of the challenges that we run into as an airport. I don't have any numbers as far as how many taxis are handicap accessible. There are taxis there that if we, again, with enough notice, they will get out there to help assist those customers that need it.
Any questions? Francine, thank you for that.
Sure.
Karen, if I could add, the situation in Denver is pretty much for most major airports in the country. They have dedicated people that have developed programs specifically for those that have some sort of transportation disability. Denver is fortunate. They have 2 large cab companies that have invested in their own in developing wheelchair accessible vehicles, and they're there in numbers to be able to take care of those that do need special services and assistance.
Just a quick comment. Just a very quick comment. I know we're talking about accessibility, and accessibility typically is defined as a wheelchair ramp, but I just wanted to sort of point out that I think accessibility has grown beyond that today, and a lot of those issues are being sort of figured into plans and design. I know it was with the NV200. I know it is with some other manufacturers. We heard London talking about it. Today, we're talking about accessibility being expanded to include things like hearing loop technology, strategically placed grab handles, step-ups. We're an aging nation, and we're far beyond the needs of the person who just happens to be a wheelchair user. We're talking about visual accessibility and hearing accessibility, and mobility impairments as opposed to strictly wheelchair use. So I think that's a direction that we need to be talking about also, going beyond the paradigm of wheelchair ramps. So just wanted to make that point.
Alan, that's an absolutely perfect comment to add there at this point. Taylor Clark, again, is a president of MobilityWorks. And Taylor, I haven't prepped you for this, but I'd like to give you the last 10 minutes to bat cleanup, if you could. One of the benefits of an association is the synergies between the regulators, those out there trying to make the rules, and those who are trying to sell into those rules, and the expertise you have of talking with everyone out there. And so I'd like to turn it over to you to kind of synthesize everything for us.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's really an honor to be here. This is my first IATR meeting, and man, I have learned so much. It has been very powerful. We are a large manufacturer, leading manufacturer and distributor and servicing facility. We build and service wheelchair vans, and that's what we've done for 20 years. And this whole thing is just blowing up, and you guys have a lot of pressure on you right now. And you know, Tom, you brought up an interesting, Alan, excuse me, you brought up an interesting point that you know, this marriage of what we're doing with the vehicles, the marriage of making these vehicles wheelchair accessible, but they also have to be ambulatory accessible. And ambulatory, people that can move in and out of the vehicle on their own accord, we need to be thinking about other disabilities as well, ease to get in the vehicles. And so you take, what we do is we take this box, and again, I've heard a lot of, you know, purpose-built vehicles. You know, the definition of purpose-built vehicles is getting thrown around. You know, I work very closely with Ford Motor Company and a lot of the OEMs, Toyota, Chrysler. Ford, for example, has a QVM program where they take this industry very seriously. So what they do is they work with us, the converter, and their engineers, the amount of money that they're throwing at their engineering, and we're focused on one thing, and that's the safety of the customer and the functionability of that vehicle. And if someone asked me whether we had a purpose-built vehicle on a Toyota Ford, I'd say yes, because the amount of money and the importance that the OEMs place on this room is hypercritical. But I'm not here this is not a commercial for MobilityWorks. This is just talking about the struggles. Is everyone in this room struggles, and more importantly, your owner-operators are struggling to find the right box that fits the customer's need in safety, convenience, and affordability. And that's a struggle. You know, with the American Disabilities Act, you've got to have certain height, width requirements that's very unique to America compared to London. It's just a much more defined parameter that we've got to work around that we can cater to this wheelchair community. And what we do is we really work closely with the regulators, and specifically to New York in the Green Cab initiative in the boroughs. That's been hugely successful. And man, did New York do a good job in regulating and making sure that all the providers of vehicles and wheelchair accessible vehicles met the QVM standards, met the regulator standards. This is really important. Now, they weren't saying it has to be this type of vehicle. They were saying it has to be safe and it has to meet these requirements. And that creates a very narrow part of the hourglass that very few companies can provide services. And I just think is an OEM supplier and a supplier to the wheelchair community. And you have to remember, we are the largest retail supplier. This wheelchair community is our life. Not only in the fleet arena, we meet and cater to this community every day in the retail arena. If you wanted to buy a vehicle in the wheelchair arena and you went into a car dealer, they wouldn't even know how to service you. So they end up at our stores, which we have 35 stores around the country. This is a very important community to us, and there's a lot of good suppliers in this room, and we are very sensitive to, what is the right vehicle, side, rear. It's different in every arena, but there are good suppliers that you really have to rely on out there, and we just have a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise on what it takes to make sure these vehicles are compliant and safe. So I'm here to support, that effort in this forum.
Taylor, any questions as follow-up there? We've sapped the room of energy clearly, but...
To the Americans, though, I will say this. Our world is turning upside down on us. All the vehicles that we're used to seeing running around, never before have we seen more global entry as far as vehicles coming into the marketplace in the next 3 to 5 years. We do a lot of the full-size Paratransit is all new. The E-Series is going away. So we have a partner in Germany. We do a lot of work over in the European arena, and our world is changing dramatically as far as the OEM chassis and what's going to be presented to this group in the next, really, 1 to 5 years. It's amazing. And the TransConnect was the first step.
And that brings me to the meeting point between our discussions yesterday and today. IATR is looking for some feedback about whether or not approaching this from a model regulation perspective makes sense. Would that be a helpful exercise at this time, or is that misguided? One of the comments yesterday that was so on point was about this notion of universal design, and is it the right way to go to have a vehicle that all customers, if you're hailing a vehicle, there's no way to know whether it's an accessible or non-accessible vehicle. Everybody's taking the same taxi, and that's our goal, or is it some different approach to serving that demand? We're going to be sending out our conference evaluation, and I'm thinking I'll probably do one that's very specifically separate to this accessibility issue, asking for more feedback about how we approach the concept of a model regulation. Christiane, I'm guessing you want to make some comments.
I just wanted to thank the panel a lot. I didn't want you to take our lack of questions or comments as a lack of inspiration. I was very much inspired by all of your presentations, and we are facing the same issue in San Francisco as not only what kind of vehicles, but what kind of program and how to incentivize both drivers and companies, make it economically achievable to provide wheelchair service. It's a incredible struggle, and so I wanted to let you know that I'm soaking it up like a sponge, and I really do hope that the IATR does address this issue, because it's incredibly difficult, especially right now with the dearth of vehicle availability. So thank you very much for the information, and I'll be in touch with probably all of you before long. Thank you.
Karen?
I'll just comment that our friends from Abu Dhabi provided us with a video of their Mercedes Vito conversions, and as we've run out of time here to show them, they will be posted on the website with this panel presentation, and we will have those links. Now that I have my act together, Ray, before I run the New Orleans video, would you like to wrap this up?
Well, we did want to thank the panel very much, and very informative. I was going to put on my university hat and say we have done research in accessible vehicles for the taxi industry. We were requested to look at the cost of the conversion, what percentage of the fleet should be wheelchair accessible. And I remember doing the report, it was based on what sort of demand is there. And when you talk to certain groups, they just say, build it and they will come. I think we found out in New York and in Chicago that 5% of the fleet is really taking care of the current demand. We were concerned, I remember when we entered the report, we were very concerned that we may be pricing the taxi service out of its market. And certainly with the discussion of apps and other alternatives to traditional taxi cabs, be it a sedan at the top end with Uber, if you will, or some of the sidecars and Lyfts and others, we don't want to kill the goose, if you will, with requirements that may be unreasonable given the current demand. I think growing with the demand, putting out 5%, if that capacity is assumed, then going on further seems to be a reasonable request. But going out with 100% accessibility may be a great goal and may objective, but you may be adding significant costs to an industry that is really being challenged by some low-cost alternatives. Panel, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate it.
That's a great observation. Thank you.
Good morning once again. I want to thank all of our panelists for doing an outstanding job today.